History has always been filled with chilling moments, but there are some forms of punishment that go beyond anything you could imagine. Tortures so brutal, they make death feel like a mercy. Imagine being slowly broken, piece by piece, or left to rot in a cage for days, your body devoured by vultures. When you think of a coffin, you might imagine a place of rest. But in medieval Europe, a coffin was not a symbol of peace. It was a brutal instrument of torture used to break both the body and the soul. This cruel punishment is known as the coffin torture, and it was a punishment so agonizing that it made death feel like a release. Unlike most tortures, the coffin torture wasn't about quick pain. It was about suffering that stretched on for days. Sometimes weeks. The victim would be locked inside a cramped iron or wooden cage that was shaped like a coffin. But this wasn't just a cage for containment. It was designed to expose the victim to the worst elements of nature. The cage was small, just big enough for the person to stand or sit, but not comfortably. No comfort here. Just a slow, torturous death. The cage would be placed in a public area so that the victim would be a spectacle. They were exposed to the burning heat of the sun, freezing cold, and the harsh rain, and that was just the beginning. The real horror was the complete isolation. With no food, no water, and no way to escape, the victim's body would start to decay in the open air. But even worse than the elements were the scavengers. Rats, crows, and even larger animals would begin to feast on the victim's flesh, picking at them while they were still alive. Imagine being fully aware as vultures and crows peck at your skin, slowly eating away at you, your body becoming a feast for the creatures of the world. And the worst part? You couldn't do anything about it. You couldn't escape. Psychologically, the coffin torture was just as agonizing as the physical pain. The victim wasn't just dying. They were being humiliated, exposed to the world as a criminal or a traitor, left to rot in front of a crowd. The slow, excruciating nature of the punishment was designed to ensure that the person was fully aware of their fate, with no hope of escape. They were left alone in the cage, hopeless and broken, until death eventually claimed them. This torture wasn't reserved for just anyone. It was used on political enemies, traitors, and those accused of grave sins like heresy or blasphemy. And it wasn't just a punishment, it was a public warning. The message was simple: defy the law, and this will be your fate. One particularly chilling example comes from the Spanish Inquisition, where people accused of heresy were locked in these cages and displayed in public, left to rot for the world to see. It was a slow death. Yes, but it was also a warning, a reminder to everyone of the consequences of going against the church and state. The coffin torture wasn't just physical torment. It was psychological, social, and emotional destruction. It was about stripping away dignity, hope, and life, piece by piece, in a very public and very agonizing way. History isn't just written with the ink of kings and conquerors. Sometimes it's etched in the screams of the broken. One of the most brutal ways people were punished in medieval Europe was by a method that made even death seem like a mercy: the breaking wheel. Used predominantly during the Middle Ages, this was not just a punishment. It was a public spectacle, a terrifying display to remind the population of the consequences of disobedience, betrayal, or crime. The victim often tied to a giant wooden wheel with their arms and legs splayed out. This wasn't some quick execution. No, the breaking wheel was designed to prolong agony. Executioners would begin by using a heavy iron or wooden club to smash bones, arms, legs, and sometimes even the spine. Slowly but methodically, like a twisted puzzle coming apart. The victim's body would be shattered, but death wouldn't come quickly. What's even more horrifying, sometimes victims weren't immediately killed. Their bodies were displayed on the wheel for hours, even days, exposed to the elements and to the eyes of anyone who happened to pass by. It wasn't just the broken bones. The pain lasted, the blood poured, and the victim's suffering became a cruel show for the public. In some of the most gruesome cases, the victim might still be alive, left on the wheel to die, slowly from shock, blood loss, or exposure. These torturous executions were often public affairs, with crowds gathered to witness the punishment. And if death didn't come fast enough, the victim might even be left there, displayed like a warning to others. One famous case of the breaking wheel comes from the 16th century. A man named Peter Neers, a German serial killer. Neers was captured and executed by the breaking wheel. His crimes were heinous, but the public display of his death made his punishment just as cruel as the crimes he committed. Once the wheel had done its work, his body was left on display for everyone to see. The spectacle wasn't just about killing him, it was about showing power. The message was clear. Anyone who dared to cross the law would suffer a brutal fate. Imagine the pain, the humiliation, the terror of knowing that this would be your end. The breaking wheel was designed to break not just bones, but the very spirit of a person. It was a terrifying reminder of how the medieval world handled its criminals, slow, painful, and for the whole world to see. When it comes to gruesome methods of execution, few can match the sheer horror of being boiled alive. Known as the Boiling Cauldron, this method of torture was as terrifying as it sounds. A brutal, scalding death, where the victim was lowered into a cauldron of boiling liquid, often oil or water, and left to die in a grotesque, fiery embrace. The origins of this horrific punishment date back to the Middle Ages, particularly in Europe, where it was used as a form of execution for particularly heinous crimes, such as murder or poisoning. It wasn't just about the physical agony, it was about sending a powerful message to the public. And what better way to ensure fear and obedience than with a method so horrifying that it left a permanent mark on the minds of those who witnessed it. The process itself was incredibly slow and painful. First, the victim was typically restrained, unable to fight or escape. They were then lowered into a massive cauldron filled with boiling liquid. The heat of the liquid would immediately begin to burn the skin, causing excruciating pain as the body was slowly immersed in the bubbling liquid. The skin would blister, the flesh would melt, and the victim would endure unimaginable pain before finally succumbing to death. But it wasn't just the physical pain that made this torture so horrifying. It was the psychological horror of knowing what was about to happen. The victims often faced a public execution, making it a spectacle for all to see. The slow, painful process of being boiled alive was meant to make an example out of the condemned, showing the populace the consequences of crime in the most horrific way imaginable. One notorious case involves the execution of Agnes Waterhouse, the first woman in England to be executed for witchcraft. In 1566, she was condemned to be boiled alive for allegedly causing the deaths of 2 people through witchcraft. Her execution was carried out in front of a crowd, and though the boiling cauldron was a horrific fate, it was all too common for those accused of such crimes during the witch hunts. The agonizing process of boiling was a terrifying reminder of how far authorities would go to make sure no one dared to cross them. It wasn't just about taking a life, it was about breaking the spirit of anyone who might consider defying the law, religion, or the state. The liquid so hot, it sears your skin, your body slowly succumbing to the intense heat, and all the while, knowing that there is no escape, no mercy, no quick end. Just the slow, suffocating agony of being boiled alive in front of an audience, left to die in one of the most agonizing ways imaginable.